Former bank robber here. Ask me anything. Over the course of your entire career, how much did you make? Not very much. Probably like 5 figures. Is there a bond between bank robbers in prison? Like, do you guys swap stories and become friendly because you're in for the same thing? Oddly, yes. I imagine it's no different than people who've played the same sport or can play the same musical instrument. What rules did you have about engagement during robberies? Presence of kids? Violence? No violence. Just walked in and acted as a regular customer. When it was my turn, I handed the teller a note saying to give me their $50 and $100. I typically clarified that I didn't have a weapon or any intention of hurting them. What movie do you think is a realistic heist movie? I mean, from planning to execution to aftermath. I don't think any of them are very realistic. Hollywood doesn't really do realism all too well. It's like asking which porn is the most realistic. By default, the professional movies are all a bit fantasy. If I had to pick, I'd say Office Space is probably the most realistic. What was the closest call for you where you actually got away with whatever you were doing? Probably the last one. The lady/teller kinda freaked out and started screaming to lock the doors. It was a tad stressful to say the least, but I managed to just turn around and walk out as though nothing were happening. They did lock the doors, but it was just after I'd walked out. I don't think the intent was to trap me there, so it's not like I barely got away in that sense. But it was still way too close for comfort. That was the end of it for me. Crazy story. What was going on in your head when you were robbing banks? Was it a huge adrenaline rush? Were you scared? Nervous? I would like to know what goes on when you commit a crime like that. Thanks. It felt a bit like riding a roller coaster. There's a sense of danger, but ultimately, it was safe enough to check out. It's obviously riskier than riding a roller coaster, but that's the best analogy I can make. It was crazy, and it was scary, but to some, that's what makes life fun. So now that you've been out of incarceration, what are you doing for a job and finding a way to make ends meet? Does being a former convict and listed as a bank robber deter you from certain jobs and all that as well? I worked the first job I could get after first getting out. I worked there, production related work, for just over a year before getting a job in the oil and gas industry. I worked there for a few years and then got out because of an injury. There are definitely certain jobs I can't do these days because of my past. For example, bank teller is probably out of the question. The law doesn't provide for discriminating against ex-cons, but most corporations still do exactly that. For the records, I support a company's right to not hire someone based on their past. I actually wish the laws were a little different there, because there's just a shit ton of wasted time going into looking for a job because you think things are fair when they're really not. I'd much rather a company be able to proudly boast, hey, keep your former criminal ass away from us, because I would do exactly that and look for the former felony friendly companies instead. Do you think the sentence fitted the crime? No. I think I got less time than I deserved. I'm forever grateful that the judge had something better in mind for me. I've never spoken with him or heard his point of view in detail, but I definitely don't think I got what I deserved. In hindsight, it worked out for the better. Maybe I'm wrong about how many years I deserved or whatever, but I still feel like I got a shit ton of mercy in all of that. Have you ever considered doing a podcast? Especially since your book says you have a lifelong best friend that grew up to be a cop. I can just see this storyline of an ex-bank robber and an ex-cop, neither of who see eye to eye with societal norms of what they're expected to be like, being something that people couldn't turn off. Especially if both you guys are funny. Something to think about. I mean, I'd subscribe. Yes. And that friend wants to do. Lol. I just realized who that was. You freaking idiot. I'm not fully read up on your story, but was your history of crime gradual and smaller offenses, or did you go directly to the bank robbery? What could those around have done to prevent this path? The worst crime I'd ever committed prior to the bank stuff was probably stealing candy from a store as a child. There was an incident in my mid-20s where I filed a fraudulent police report saying that someone had stolen my identity, but I don't know how illegal it was, since I was pretty vague about the whole thing. Good question. I wish I had something more interesting to say about it. What's something you'd like to share with us that hasn't previously been asked or prompted? Looking for some tidbit of information that you'd really love to share but haven't had the opening for. Marriage is weird. I hate that religion and the law have somehow managed to come together on that one. If you love someone, be with them. If you don't want to be with them anymore, then don't. I don't understand how we got to the point that marriage is such a major thing. Is life possible after prison? Outside of just starting your own business, is there anywhere that is willing to take in a felon at a reasonable pay? What's the best practice for dodging cops and staying low? There are lots of blue collar jobs worth taking. Learning a trade is your best bet though, I think. The best practice for dodging cops is to not try and dodge cops. They're there and they are not going anywhere. Just keep your nose clean and wear your seatbelt. Hello Clay. I've got a few questions for you. How difficult is it to get contraband in prison? How do you get it in? Did the prison system succeed in helping you change your ways? And finally, is it true that Baskin-Robbins always finds out? Wish you all the best with your days ahead. As long as there are prison guards, it will be easy to get contraband into prison. They've got the market on that shit. The prison system is trash. It doesn't work. First rule of Baskin-Robbins is never mind. Wrong joke. Thanks. Are the prisons really divided into racial groups? Were you coerced into aligning with a certain group? Yes. And yes. I'm white, so I mostly lived with whites. But the thing is, racial segregation in prison isn't even a bad thing. Nobody gets butthurt about it. It's just how it is. I could play chess with non-whites, or go watch Bet in the Black TV room or whatever else. It wasn't a literal don't associate with people who aren't your kind of thing. It was more of a be with what you are kind of thing. Hope that makes sense. What is your Enneagram type, and why do you like this personality test more than others, like the MBTI? 5W4. I'm not a fan of MBTI. It's super useful in the corporate world, for sure. But it's more about how to get the most out of people instead of getting the most out of yourself. Granted, I'm not an MBTI expert, but at a glance, I feel like it's more about the company and less about the person. I actually am not a fan of personality tests in general. For me, the Enneagram is more about a map that helps us understand why we do the things we do. I've never taken a test to find out what I am. I just want to study more and learn about how I can just be a better version of myself. Hope that makes sense. Were you ever remorseful in the moment for the bank employees? I couldn't care less about stealing from a big banking company. Morally, I wouldn't have an issue. I would, however, be very remorseful about potentially hurting someone just trying to make a paycheck, physically or emotionally. I never really felt much towards the tellers on a personal level. There was one moment in one of them where I felt bad about the teller, but I wouldn't quite describe it as remorse. It was more along the lines of, man, this sucks. For the most part, I just saw the people working at the bank as part of the company, not individuals. Clay, I use your debt-free scream every time we teach an FPU class. You've inspired so many. Thank you for being open with your story. What a surprise to see you on my Reddit front page. I guess my question is, how is your life going financially since you made the update video in 2015? I'd love to be able to give a more recent update to everyone who's watching you and believing they can do it too. Better than I deserve. Haha, represent. Cut me some slack for the language I use here on Reddit. I cleaned up quite a bit for DR of all the things I was most nervous about. I think dropping an F-bomb was probably at the top of that list. Lol. I love everything that DR is doing, and I can easily say that I wouldn't be who I am without his show and his teachings. To answer your question, things are going just fine. Still debt free and can't imagine living any other way. Feel free to shoot me a PM if you want more detailed information. My inbox is a bit nutty at the moment, so give me some time. Or if you'd rather hit me up on Facebook, that's cool too. I'm easy to find. Why do 3 ask me anything about the same thing? Not saying you shouldn't, necessarily, but I'm just curious. Fair question. I did the first one because a friend suggested it. I was in the middle of a Kickstarter trying to fund the book. I did the second one because there were so many things that I didn't like from the first one. It was also a lot of fun, so I figured what the hell, I'm doing this one because I'm a creature of habit or neurotic repetition. Like, if I'm walking and one of my heels slightly drags the ground, I'll do the same with the other so everything is balanced. I really like the upvote/downvote system that Reddit has, and I figured people would shit on this third one if they didn't want me doing it. So as long as there is mostly a positive response, I'll keep it up. Hey dude, looked through a bunch of these, maybe they weren't expanded adequately, but I got a question for you about autism. My cousin's second kid has autism and I've never really understood how to interact and be a good relative. I don't know much about it because we don't see each other, much less a well-loved side of the family and all. If you had to give advice on how to be a good relative to a kid with autism, what advice would you give? Thanks for your time. Well, the concern and consideration itself puts you ahead of most. I would only encourage you to build on that by talking to your cousin and asking them this question specifically. I would be elated if someone in my family asked me verbatim exactly what you just did. I just downloaded and read your book. You are a funny character. I hated and loved you at the same time. I was rooting for you to stay with your wife while thinking she deserved better. I kind of found your desire to go to jail weirdly arrogant and narcissistic, while also feeling respect for you figuring out what you needed. What is your relationship like now with your Candace and your sons? You brought up autism. Are you autistic? Why do you think learning about the Enneagram was so powerful for you? How have you used it post-prison? Candace and I are divorced. We raise our 2 sons together. I'm a parent of autism. I don't have it myself. The Enneagram was the single most powerful tool I had in learning about myself, and more importantly, my glitches and how to deal with them. And yes, look up Enneagram Prison Project. Prison life. All seriousness here. Did you make friends, such as brotherhood in a sense? As a homosexual, what would my role be in prison? What type of person handles prison well? I'm a strong-minded individual that doesn't need Pride Month or parades to boost confidence in my sexuality. If you had to rob another bank, what would you do different to not get caught? Sexual orientation doesn't determine your role in prison any more than your race. Sure, it can have some influence, but it doesn't determine who you are to everyone else. Prison really isn't all too different than the real world once you get into the swing of things. Yes, there are some quite massive differences, but the things that make life a little tough out here can do the same in prison. Being gay doesn't automatically mean that prison would be tough for you. Hell, it might make it easier. I have no idea. I'm not gay, so I can't say for sure. From the way your comment reads, I'd say you'd be fine in prison. Are you the same Clay that did a debt-free scream on Dave Ramsey's show? Edit. Yep, I just looked it up. You're the only debt-free scream I have ever watched on YouTube, because there was a thread on r/Dave Ramsey about people's favorite debt-free screams and I believe yours was at the top, so I watched it. I mostly just listened to him on Spotify. I remembered your name, because it is my name also and not very common. Good job dude. Your story is super inspiring. You're on a great path. Keep inspiring people to do the right thing. How was your experience on DR's show? Did you meet him? Are you still debt free? Yep, that's me. Man, my experience on the show was surreal. I couldn't possibly speak more highly of everyone in that building, from Dave all the way down to whoever is the newest person there. I've never felt more welcomed by a business, to the point that I forget it's an actual business. And yep, still debt free. Current bank teller here. I don't know at the moment your history or how many banks you robbed, but I'm curious about the security of the banks you were at. We are told to always greet customers when they walk in. I guess it will make the perp less likely to take action if they are acknowledged, and encourage them to remove hats, sunglasses, etc. Did any teller you encounter do anything to discourage you from robbing, and did they act accordingly when they discovered what you were there for? A simple greeter, like someone at a front desk saying hello to me as I walked in, wasn't a deterrent. Most of the banks I robbed had those. As far as asking people to remove hats, sunglasses, etc. Yeah, that would probably make a robber uncomfortable, but I would think you'd also likely bug some customers with that line of treatment as well. In life, a lot of folks have a bucket list. Usually a bucket list are things I feel you should just do. I instead have a fuck it list, like, I'm going to die, 100% sure, what would I do? I've often joked that I'd want to rob a bank as part of this list. If you had never robbed a bank, but knew what it would feel like etc., and you found out you had 1 month to live, would you rob a bank, or is it not worthy of some of that last time on earth? If you've ever fallen in love with someone, and then dated them, and then broke up with them, you might have an idea of what it feels like for me to consider ever robbing a bank again. Like and subscribe for more Reddit videos.